federal government was going to pay back everybody, even those that didn't owe as much? That's not really very fair. So this started a controversy between the northern states and the southern states. So those states with small debts, or states who paid off their war debts, because some legislators actually paid off their individuals. Does that make sense? So those states with small debts, or states who paid off their war debts, argued it was unfair to force them to assume their neighbors' burdens, right? Because they were going to tax every state to raise revenue to pay off these states. Well, if you paid off your car loan, you want to help pay Macklin's? Well, no, because you took care of your business. So do you see the conflict there? And he just said, you know, it's too conflicting to figure out how we're going to pay off individual states and make it fair. So those states with smaller debts, or states who paid off their war debts, are just going to have to assume their neighbors' losses too. And a good comparison would be if I'm going to pay, you know, the federal government's going to pay all your car loans off. Okay, but we're going to take all the money from all of you guys. Now, maybe this is a better example. Okay, I'm going to pay all your car loans off. I'm the federal government. You're each individual states. Well, Lauren already paid off her car, but I'm still going to tax Lauren and have her raise revenue to pay off your car. And she's already got hers paid. Does she think that's fair? Does that make sense to you, how they did this thing? Okay, well, because they couldn't agree, the Northerners and the Southerners arranged something known as the Assumption Bill to solve this debt here. Okay, they agreed to the Assumption Bill. Now, the Southerners were supported by Thomas Jefferson at the time. And what is he? Secretary of State. And he was a Southerner. And he was for the national government assuming the state debts. So where do you think most of the states were that still owed money? What? No, he's a Southerner wanting the federal government to pay off the state debts. Well, yeah, he's a Southerner, so you can kind of read between the lines here that the southern states were the ones that had more state debt than the northern states, right? Okay, so the Southerners, led by Thomas Jefferson, agreed that the national government would assume the state debts. I got that totally backwards. I got it backwards. Who owed the most debt? Northerners. Somebody said that. Northerners did. So Thomas Jefferson got the Southerners to agree that I do that every year, that the national government would assume the state debts. So even though they owe less, they're going to agree to pay them off. But they're going to want something in return, are they not? They're going to want something in return. So I apologize for getting that backwards. So the Southerners, led by Thomas Jefferson, agreed that the national government would assume the state debts, even though the South, obviously, which were richer because of plantations and such, had paid off their debts. What are they going to want in return? The Northerners, who were led by Alexander Hamilton, are going to have to do something to get the Southerners to assume that debt. What do you think the Southerners want? Capital. They want the capital moved from where is it right now? Okay, to where? To land donated by Virginia and Maryland. So they want the capital moved southern. Does that make sense? So after I messed you up there, I apologize. So the bottom line is, the Southerners, who would be assuming most of the Northerners' debt as a result of this $24 million owed in state debts, say, yeah, we'll go ahead and do that, but you have to agree to move the capital from the northern part down to land donated by Virginia and Maryland on the banks of the Potomac River. So in 1800, the government of the United States actually moved not from New York. Where was the capital? Philadelphia, because Washington was inaugurated not at the capital. Where was he inaugurated? In New York City on Wall Street. Okay, but the capital is Philadelphia. So the capital was moved from Philadelphia to an area of land on the Potomac River donated by Virginia and Maryland, now known as what? Washington, D.C. Not Washington, Virginia, or Washington, Maryland. Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, which means it is not a what? And it's not in a state. It's in the District of Columbia. It's in a federal district. Okay? So let me get that straight so we're straight on that. Because they could not agree on how to pay off this state debt of $24 million, because some states owed little or nothing and didn't want to assume the other state's debt, finally, because of the Assumption Bill, the Southerners, led by Thomas Jefferson, who had less debt, agreed that the national government could assume the state debts and they would be paying twice, so to speak. In return for that, the Northerners, led by Alexander Hamilton, had to agree to move the nation's capital to the banks of the Potomac River on land donated by Virginia and Maryland. So as a result, in 1800, the government of the United States was moved from Philadelphia to a new capital, now known as Washington, D.C., District of Columbia. Okay? So, we've solved the debt problem, we've solved the court system problem, and now we're going to move on to Alexander Hamilton's bank proposal. Because what do we need? We need a place to do what? Put tax dollars that we accumulate. We have no federal treasury. Okay? So Alexander Hamilton's bank proposal. Well, after they figured out the court system problem, and after the issue of finances of paying this debt back was solved, Hamilton then asked the Congress to pass a law that would create a national bank. One bank to put tax money in. And this national bank, if passed, would be called the Bank of the United States. Now, it's kind of like the court system. We're only going to have one Bank of the United States setting somewhere. What else are we going to have? When we create the Bank of the United States, it's going to be one large central bank with what? Branches off. And where do you think they're going to put those branches of the bank? Where are they going to put them? Well, good guess. In the major cities. So they're going to determine what are the major cities in the United States, and they are going to put branch banks in major American cities. So the Bank of the United States would consist of one large central bank with branch banks in major American cities. Now, Hamilton saw three advantages to a national bank that he used to convince Congress into doing this. Here are the three advantages of a national bank according to Hamilton. Now, our first one's pretty obvious. What is each branch bank going to provide for tax officials? A safe place to store the money, yeah. So each branch bank is going to provide a safe place for tax officials to deposit any money collected from the people. It's not all going to be in the big bank. It's going to be in branch banks. Now, how did people pay for things at this time, for the most part? What did you pay with? Not like today. Gold and silver, okay? And another advantage of this Bank of the United States is that each of these branch banks would have the ability to transfer money from one branch to another by simply sending checks, not having to worry of the risk of shipping gold and silver. Because if you start shipping gold and silver, what's going to happen? People are going to try to steal it. I mean, that's what they do. So anyway, the second advantage was that each branch bank would have the ability to transfer money from one place to another by sending checks, not risking sending gold and shipping gold and silver. Now, what might be another problem we had that we have to fix if we've got 13 different states concerning currency? Well, concerning currency, when people went to buy things. Some people used paper, some people used gold, some people used silver. And so a third advantage of this Bank of the United States, according to Alexander Hamilton, is that the Bank of the United States would provide what he called a sound uniform currency, which would be the same all over the country. A dollar's worth the same in the state of Wiley as it is the state of Wheeler. And there's no dispute, okay? So it would provide a sound uniform currency in which money would have the same value all over the country. It wouldn't be worth more in North Carolina than it is in Massachusetts. You see that now when you go to Canada. Is American money worth more than Canadian money? You always have to transfer money back. Not near what it used to be, but it is. So you wouldn't have to worry about that, okay? Now, in the past, people did not have faith in paper money. What did they have faith in? Coins, gold and silver. And he felt that if they put a Bank of the United States, well-organized bank, one large central bank and branch banks across major American cities, that people in the United States would have faith in paper money because it would bear the name of the Bank of the United States and it would mean it was good. It was good money, okay? It would bear the seal. So that was kind of his proposal as far as getting a bank put together. Okay, and Congress agreed. So we've covered, not everything, but we've covered the court system. We've covered repaying the war debt. We've talked about creating the national bank because we had to have a place to put tax money. What's the next thing we got to figure out? Taxes, okay? So that takes us to the next subtopic, which is new tariff legislation. Of course, tariff is just a fancy name for taxes, okay? New tariff legislation. Now, when Congress was called upon to pass legislation to collect taxes for money for this new federal treasury they just put together, they basically taxed two things. The first two taxes as the United States of America were these two. Now, you don't want to get people too tipped off right off the bat. So who might you tax first to try to get some money into your treasury? No? You think wealthy and South are good guesses, but we don't even want to tick those people off. So who do we want to tax first? Who do we want to pay taxes to us first? What? Well, most of the loyalists are where? Britain. So who do you want to tax? You're getting close. Who's your first tax going to be on? People in the country or out of the country? We're going to tax foreign countries for their right to do what? And sell their goods. So the first tax that Congress passes to get money in the new federal treasury is they're going to tax foreign countries for the right to sell their goods in America. Do foreign countries want to sell their goods to the new United States of America? Well, sure they do, because they make money doing so. So you know what we're going to do to get a little money in the coffer? We're going to tax these foreign countries, and anything they want to sell in the United States, they're going to pay to sell. Pretty good idea, actually. Now the second tax, because they had to tax somebody in this country, the second tax that was passed by Congress would levy a tax on distilled liquors. Distilled liquors. So all liquor distillers were going to have to pay a tax on every gallon of liquor they produced or sold. Now, what are distilled liquors? What's a common name for it? Whiskey. Yeah, okay, it's distilled liquors. So they're going to put a tax on those that are producing or selling distilled liquors or whiskey. Now, what part of the country wasn't really happy geographically with this move? People that lived where? The opposite. What do you think? People in this area. Okay, what are these people? What is this called now? Since it's not part of the 13 states, it's called the what? The old, or the old F word, but not the nasty F word. Frontier. So the people that were most upset about this new tax on whiskey were people that lived on the American frontier, which was the land between the Appalachian Mountains and the Mississippi River, from the Great Lakes to Florida. That's that land we gained after the Revolutionary War. Frontiersmen lived out there. People that weren't part of the mainstream civilization of states, so to speak. Now, where were most of the crops that would be used for distilled liquors in the United States grown? On the frontier. Now, the thing that was kind of crazy is there's all kinds of things that the farmers on the frontier could be growing, but what do they have to get it? What do they have to do to be successful? Once they grow corn, or they grow this or that or whatever, what do they got to do to make any profit? They have to not only sell it, but before they sell it, they got to do what? Yeah, they got to get it over to the states to sell. So a lot of these farmers on the frontier, because it was so difficult to transport their crops to market, they simply grew corn only. Because corn could be used to do what? Make whiskey. Okay? So they didn't have to ship any big bunches of crops. They simply grew corn. They built their own stills. They converted their corn into whiskey. And they could easily load barrels of whiskey onto their wagons and take them east to do what? Sell. So frontier farmers grew corn. They had their own stills. They produced that corn into whiskey. They loaded their barrels of whiskey on mules and carts and drove them eastward toward the markets. Now, since this was basically the only source of income, because that's what they were all doing because of the transportation issues, do you think they wanted to part with some of their profits? Heck no, they didn't want to. So what did they do? They rebelled by refusing to pay the tax. We're not paying it. We're not going to do it. So they rebel. And they refuse to pay the tax on whiskey to the government. Well, what did we do? The government sent out federal marshals out there to the frontier to enforce the law. How'd that work for us? Not very good. I would compare it to the first president that tries to come and get all the guns out of Wyoming. Probably you better send some pretty tough federal marshals, because more than likely those guys are going to get driven out, right? And that's what happened. They sent these federal marshals over to collect the tax, and it didn't take long for them to figure out they weren't going to do that very easily. So they drove out these federal marshals. They aren't paying their taxes. So the farmers refused to pay their tax. Federal marshals tried to enforce the law. Armed groups of farmers drove them away, and this rebellion became known in American history as the Whiskey Rebellion. Okay? Probably for sure going to be on your AP exam next spring. I'm just guessing. Okay? So this became known as the Whiskey Rebellion. Well, you're President Washington. You're trying to set up a new government. You're trying to establish some laws. You're trying to establish, some tax collecting. And the first time you try to tax somebody, which, by the way, was with representation, sort of, because Congress decided, but do you think there were many congressmen on the frontier? No, that's why they thought that they should elect a president, because these people on the frontier don't even know who the candidates are, right? So, Washington cannot have citizens of the United States of America, no matter where they live, refuse to pay taxes and directly challenge the power of this new government. So, who does he send out next to collect the taxes? The military. Sends out the military. So because of this, Washington calls out the military to assist those federal marshals. He sends the federal marshals back, but they got a little bit of backing this time. Well, 15,000 soldiers to the frontier is a little more than these farmers are going to be able to handle. I mean, they're not stupid. So because of the presence of the 15,000 soldiers that Washington sent to the frontier with the federal marshals, the Whiskey Rebellion ended fairly quickly. Okay? Now, the most important thing about that was that the newly formed federal government had demonstrated its strength. Okay? Demonstrated strength. We are not going to have people not pay their taxes. It was probably a good lesson to be learned, and there's always setting an example in life, right? And the farmers on the frontier became the first example of, when we say there's a tax in this country, when our Congress says we're going to tax, you're going to pay it or you're not. Okay? So they say there's two things you're forced to do if you live in the United States of America. Die and pay taxes. Now you don't have to pay taxes, but what happens if you don't? You go to jail and probably die. Okay? So it's important. It's an important part. We do argue over where those taxes should be paid because, as you look at the debate, Donald Trump wants to give tax relief to the wealthy and to businesses because he believes, he's partially correct, that if the wealthy don't have a big tax burden, they will start new businesses and they will employ more people and our unemployment will go down. Hillary Clinton on the other side wants to give a tax break to all those families that earn $250,000 or less. And she really wants to tax the wealthy because she feels like they don't pay their fair share. So taxes, which we started back here in the early 1800s, are a big issue today, are they not? We're arguing who's going to be the next president and what they're going to do on taxes. Now, what I want to tell you before we quit is at the end, in the end of this whole thing, Alexander Hamilton's financial program proves to be a great success. And tomorrow I'm going to give you 5 reasons why his entire program to put our country on good financial footing is important and why it was successful. Then we're going to move on to having some trouble overseas because we don't have a foreign policy or Navy or Army. Okay? We have one, but it's weak. It's strong enough to whip the whiskey rebellers, though.